The year was 2018, and I was in my final year of college, suffocating under the weight of deadlines and a constant, low-level anxiety about the future. My friends and I, a small, tight-knit group of misfits, felt the same way. There was Leo, the quiet, thoughtful one who found peace in nature. Maria, the practical one who always had a plan and a first aid kit. And Jake, the loud, impulsive one who was always pushing us to do something crazy. We were all stuck in the same kind of rut, just grinding through the motions. We decided we needed a reset, a complete break from everything. The idea of going somewhere remote, off the grid, started as a joke, but it quickly became the only thing we could talk about. We found this spot on an old hiking forum, a place deep within a less-traveled national forest, described as unspoiled and truly isolated. It sounded perfect, a place where the only sounds would be the wind and the trees, a place where we could finally breathe. It felt like our last chance to feel like ourselves before the real world swallowed us whole. We packed up my beat-up old Honda CR-V, loaded with tents, sleeping bags, and enough instant noodles to last a month. The drive was long, the roads turning from asphalt to gravel, then to just two dirt tracks carving through a dense canopy of trees. The air grew cooler, and the light filtering through the leaves took on a strange, eerie green hue. We were giddy with the sense of adventure, windows down, music blasting, totally unaware of the silent, unseen eyes already watching us that we found the spot exactly as the forum described it. A small clearing beside a creek, surrounded by towering pines and a dense wall of undergrowth. Setting up camp was a chaotic, joyful mess. We pitched our two tents, one for the guys and one for the girls, and Maria, ever the planner, meticulously organized our food cooler. The first night was pure bliss. We made a huge bonfire, roasted marshmallows, and told ghost stories until the flames dwindled to embers. The silence was absolute, a profound quiet that felt almost deafening after months of city noise. We fell asleep to the gentle babbling of the creek, a sound that lulled us into a deep, dreamless sleep. But the next morning, something was off. The cooler, which Maria had sealed tight, was ajar, the lock snapped clean in two. Two of our packages of hot dogs were gone, along with a bag of marshmallows. We chalked it up to some hungry raccoons or a bear, though none of us had heard a thing. It was strange, but not alarming. We were in the wilderness, after all. But as the day went on, the little things started to pile up. A branch, thick as a man's arm, was snapped clean off a tree near our tent. Not hanging, not fallen, but snapped as if by a sudden, violent force. Then, while Maria was by the creek, she came back looking pale, pointing to the muddy bank. There, in the soft earth, were a series of footprints. They weren't animal prints. They were clearly human, but they were long and unnervingly wide, with no sign of a shoe or boot. They were the prints of bare feet, and they led directly into the deeper woods, just beyond the reach of our campsite. That night, the playful energy from the day before was completely gone. We tried to pretend everything was normal, but the conversation was strained and punctuated by long, anxious silences. Every time a branch snapped or the wind rustled the leaves, we all froze. The fire, which had felt so comforting the night before, now seemed like a beacon, a flashing sign to whatever was out there that we were here, exposed. Maria kept insisting it was just a bear, but even her voice lacked conviction. Jake, the one who was never serious, kept his eyes glued to the dark perimeter of the woods, his face a mask of uncharacteristic quiet. I remember feeling this heavy weight in the air, this suffocating tension that made it hard to breathe. We didn't talk about the footprints again, but they were all we could think about, a phantom image burned into our minds. We all turned in early, but none of us were really sleeping. I kept a small pocket knife from my backpack gripped so tight in my hand that my knuckles ached. The tent fabric felt flimsy, a paper-thin barrier against the vast, whispering darkness outside that it was sometime in the dead of night when a sound, or maybe the lack of one, jolted me awake. The creek's constant murmur had stopped, drowned out by an unnatural silence that felt louder than any noise. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I lay there for a minute, paralyzed, trying to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks. But then I felt it, a palpable, cold presence just outside our tent. I slowly, carefully shifted my weight, straining to look out the small, meshed window. And there, beside the pile of cold, dead embers that used to be our fire, was a figure. It was low to the ground, crouched in a way that didn't seem quite human, its form a single, unbroken shadow against the faint moonlight. It wasn't moving, just still. I couldn't make out any features, just the silhouette of a person squatting there, their head tilted towards our tents, as if listening, or maybe just watching. My throat was dry, and every muscle in my body locked up. This wasn't a bear, not an animal. This was someone, and they were staring right at us, waiting. I closed my eyes as tight as I could, squeezing them shut, hoping that when I opened them, the shadow would be gone. But when I finally dared to look again, it was still there, a silent sentinel in the dark. It felt like an eternity before it finally, and without a sound, simply melted back into the wall of trees, leaving me alone with the silent, suffocating terror. I didn't dare wake anyone up. I just lay there, shaking, until the first gray light of dawn broke through the canopy that I woke up with the first sliver of sunlight. But the exhaustion was bone deep, a heavy blanket of dread I couldn't shake off. My mind replayed the image of that figure, squatting silently in the dark, over and over again. I didn't say a word about it to Leo or the others. How do you even begin to describe something like that without sounding completely insane? I felt this terrible isolation, like I was the only one who knew the real danger we were in. The morning was tense. The easy camaraderie from the first day was gone, replaced by a quiet, jumpy paranoia. Every rustle in the trees made us flinch. We ate our breakfast in near silence, just chewing on dry granola bars, avoiding eye contact. Maria, the most level-headed of us, was the one who broke the silence. She went to refill her water bottle at the creek and came back holding something between her thumb and forefinger, her face pale. It was a small piece of fabric, a swatch of dirty, faded red flannel, tangled in a thorny bush right on the bank. It wasn't just old. It looked like it had been ripped, a jagged, frayed edge telling a story of a struggle. This wasn't some animal's work. That little piece of cloth was the final straw. Maria looked at us, her eyes wide with a fear I hadn't seen before. "We need to go? Now." Her voice was a shaky whisper. We didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. We started to pack up our tents, the sense of urgency overriding any lingering denial. It was Jake, of all people, who hesitated. "Hold on," he said, his face a mixture of fear and bravado. "Before we leave, let's just check it out. See where those footprints went. Maybe it's just some local kids." Maria and I immediately shot down the idea, but Leo, ever the curious one, backed him up. "He's right," Leo said, his voice quiet. I want to know what we're running from." Against my better judgment, we agreed. We followed the faded, barefoot prints, deeper into the thick forest. The path was barely a path, more of a narrow track through the dense undergrowth, branches clawing at our clothes and faces. The silence out here was different, not the peaceful quiet of the first night, but a heavy, watchful stillness. The air grew colder, and a faint, acrid smell of damp earth and something else, something metallic and sharp, hung in the air. We pushed on for what felt like an eternity, our hearts pounding, until we saw it. A small, makeshift structure nestled in a thicket of pines, almost perfectly camouflaged. It wasn't a cabin. It was a lean-to, a hodgepodge of old branches and tarps, covered with moss and leaves. It looked like it had been there for years, a ghost of a shelter hiding in the shadows. The sight of that cabin stopped us dead in our tracks. It wasn't just a random shelter. It was a deliberate, secretive thing, like a nest built by something inhuman. A thick, unsettling quiet fell over us. We just stood there for a long minute, a mix of morbid curiosity and absolute terror warring inside us. We cautiously crept closer, our footsteps swallowed by the mossy ground. The air around the cabin was heavy, thick with a damp, metallic scent. We peered inside through a gap in the tarps. It was a small space, no more than a few feet in any direction and dimly lit. The floor was just packed dirt, and a rough-hewn bench sat against one wall. On it lay a pile of old, dirty clothes, faded flannel shirts and grimy pants, and several rusty knives, their blades nicked and stained. It was a gut-wrenching sight, a tableau of squalid existence that made our stomachs churn. But the real horror wasn't on the bench. It was on the wall opposite us, Pinned to the moss-covered branches were dozens of photos. They weren't your typical hiking snapshots. They were small, old Polaroids, their colors faded and their edges curled. We leaned in closer, our hearts thumping against our ribs. The pictures showed people, campers, hikers, families, caught in candid moments. They were all taken from a distance, from hidden vantage points. A man sleeping in a hammock, a couple laughing by a campfire, a group of friends setting up a tent. There was a sickening realization that these people had no idea they were being watched, just like us. And then, our eyes landed on a specific photo, a more recent one tacked to the center of the wall. My blood ran cold, and I felt the air get sucked out of my lungs. It was us. It was a photo of our camp, taken from the very trees we were now standing in. We were all in it. Jake waving his arms, Maria organizing the cooler, Leo setting up the tent. The shot was crisp and clear, and we were all laughing, completely unaware that a camera was focused on us from the shadows. In that single, horrifying moment, it all clicked into place. The footprints, the broken cooler, the shadow in the night. It wasn't a warning. It was a record, a collection. We were the latest subjects in a gallery of stolen moments, and the artist was out there, somewhere, watching us. Without a word, a single, unspoken terror passed between us. We turned and ran, not just back to the camp, but as fast as our legs could carry us. The thought of that person out there, maybe even watching us flee, a physical weight on our backs that we didn't look back. The moment we were out of that clearing, we ran. Branches tore at our clothes and faces, roots tripped us up, but we didn't stop or slow down. Our only thought was to get back to the car. My lungs burned, and a stitch tore through my side, but the adrenaline was a powerful fuel. We stumbled out of the woods and into the small clearing we had set up camp in, a place that now felt completely alien and sinister. Without a word, we threw our bags and tents into the back of my CRV, not bothering to pack anything properly. We just shoved it all in, frantic and clumsy, our hands shaking so hard we could barely grip anything. We piled into the car, slamming the doors shut and fumbling with the locks. The click of the door locks was the most comforting sound I've ever heard. We were in, safe for now, but the feeling of being hunted, of being observed, lingered in the air, a phantom chill inside the car even though the sun was blazing. We just sat there for a long minute, hyperventilating, the silence inside the car broken only by our own frantic, ragged breathing that I fumbled with the keys, my hand trembling so badly I almost dropped them. I turned the ignition, and the engine roared to life, a beautiful, loud confirmation of our escape. We sped out of that clearing, tires spitting up gravel and dirt, not caring about the ruts or the winding road. No one spoke. We just stared ahead, our eyes darting to the rearview mirror and the dense woods on either side, convinced that at any moment, a figure would appear between the trees, running after us. The hours-long drive felt like a lifetime. The silent tension in the car was so thick you could cut it with one of those rusty knives we had seen. It was only when the gravel road finally gave way to asphalt, and we started seeing the first signs of human habitation, a faded billboard, a distant farm, that the tight knot in my chest began to loosen. We pulled into the parking lot of a gas station on the outskirts of a small town, a place bustling with people, cars, and the mundane noise of everyday life. The normalcy was almost jarring. We just sat there, the car still running, the air conditioning blasting, trying to ground ourselves in a world that felt completely foreign after what we had just seen. That we finally got out of the car, our legs wobbly and weak. We bought coffee and snacks, but none of us could eat. We sat at a plastic picnic table, sipping our coffee and trying to process it all. The words came out in a trickle, quiet and shaky at first, then flowing faster as we pieced together the horror. The broken lock, the footprints, the silent shadow at the fire pit, the photos. It all formed a sickening, clear narrative. This wasn't a prank or an animal. This was a person who lived out there, collecting moments of other people's lives, watching them, studying them. The thought of it was even more terrifying than the physical danger. The violation was so personal, so intimate. We couldn't understand why. What was the point? The lack of a clear motive made it feel even more monstrous, more unhinged. We all agreed we had to report it, but the question of who to call and what to say hung in the air. Hey, some guy in the woods took pictures of us. It sounded crazy, and we knew it, but we couldn't just leave it. We had to try it out. We drove to the nearest police station, a small, brick building with a faded sign. The officer on duty, a tired-looking man with kind eyes and a thick mustache, listened to our story with a patient but visibly skeptical expression. He took notes, asked a few questions, and promised to send someone out to check the area. He didn't promise to find anything. We left feeling a little defeated, like we hadn't been believed. But a week later, we got a call. It was the officer. He told us they had sent a small search team to the coordinates we had given them. They found the clearing, they found the vague path we had taken, and they even found the lean-to. But he said it was empty. No rusty knives, no clothes, and no photos. He said it looked like it had been abandoned for years. I asked him if he was sure, and he just said, "Son, there was nothing there." My heart sank. The reality of it all was gone, replaced by an empty, impossible space. To this day, the thought of that person out there, and the way they just vanished, haunts me. We were lucky, yes, but that sense of being watched, of being just one face in a silent gallery, never really leaves you. The woods hold a secret, and it's still out there. This happened a few years ago, back in the fall of 2018. My wife, Sarah, and I decided we needed a break from the city. Life in Sao Paulo was just this endless loop of traffic, deadlines, and noise. Our two kids, Leo and Sophia, were glued to their screens, and we felt like we were losing them to the digital world. So we hatched this plan, a weekend camping trip to Itatiaia National Park. It's a beautiful place, a real lush forest with these towering peaks, and we thought it would be the perfect way to force a digital detox and reconnect as a family. We bought all the gear, a brand new 6-person tent, fancy sleeping bags, a portable stove, the whole shebang. We were really excited, picturing bonfires and stargazing, all that classic stuff you see in movies. The first day was amazing, exactly what we hoped for. The air was crisp and smelled of pine and damp earth, a welcome change from the city smog. We hiked a bit, setting up our camp near a small, gurgling stream. Sarah made a great dinner, and we sat around a small fire, just talking and laughing. It was the first time in a long time we felt like a real family again. But as night fell, things started to get weird. The kids were in their sleeping bags, and Sophia, our youngest, who's a total chatterbox, suddenly went quiet. She leaned over to me and whispered, "Dad, did you hear that?" I told her it was probably just the wind or some animal, but she shook her head, her big brown eyes wide. It wasn't a growl, she insisted. It was a giggle, and it said my name. I just patted her head, thinking she was probably just sleepy and her imagination was running wild. Leo, who was 10 at the time and always tried to act tough, chimed in. "Yeah, I heard it too." It was calling out Leo. He said it with a bravado he didn't quite feel, I could tell. I laughed it off, telling them the forest was full of strange sounds and they shouldn't worry. Looking back, that was my first mistake. I should have paid more attention. The laughter they described wasn't a human one. They said it was high-pitched, almost musical, like wind chimes made of glass, and my initial dismissal came from a place of parental certainty, a stubborn refusal to believe that anything could disrupt our idyllic weekend. Sarah, though, she wasn't so quick to brush it off. She had this look in her eyes, a mixture of concern and a silent, unacknowledged unease. We tucked the kids in, zipped up their side of the tent, and lay there in the dark. For a while, there was nothing but the usual night sounds, crickets chirping, the rustling of leaves, the faint sound of the stream. I was just about to drift off when Sarah nudged me. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice barely a breath. This time I did. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. A small, high-pitched giggle that seemed to float on the night air, bouncing between the dense trees. It wasn't menacing, not at first. It sounded like the kind of innocent, mischievous giggle you'd hear at a playground. Then, the giggling was followed by a voice, a sing-songy, childlike voice, repeating a phrase I had told the kids earlier that day. "The mountains have ears." It was something I had said in passing, a silly little joke to get them to listen. But hearing it now, spoken by something unseen in the woods, it felt sinister. The giggles and whispers kept coming, closer now. They weren't just random sounds anymore. They were weaving a bizarre tapestry of familiar phrases, all things we had said to the kids or things they had said to us. "Look for the fireflies," a tiny, hollow voice called out. mimicking my own excited tone from that afternoon. Another voice chimed in, the one with the biggest flashlight wins, a direct quote from a game Leo and I had played. It was like some twisted echo chamber, playing back our day's conversations in a distorted, haunting way. The voices sounded so real, so much like children, that my mind started doing mental gymnastics. Maybe it was another family, camping nearby, playing a prank? But the park was huge, and we hadn't seen anyone else all day. The voices were too clear, too close, and they had a strange, almost watery quality to them, like they were being spoken from underwater. We lay there, paralyzed with a fear that was both logical and completely irrational. The laughter was playful, but the context was pure horror. It felt like we were being toyed with, like something was trying to lure us out of the safety of our tent. That's when the fear really set in, that this wasn't an animal or a prank. This was something else entirely. The giggles and whispers were no longer distant. They were right outside our tent. The sound wasn't like a kid talking loudly. It was like they were pressed against the nylon, their voices muffled but horribly clear. "Sarah, come out, wherever you are," a high-pitched voice sang, right by my wife's side of the tent. It was a song she used to sing to the kids when they played hide and seek, and hearing it now, from an unseen source, was a whole new kind of terror. Leo and Sophia were wide awake now, huddled together in their sleeping bags. I could hear their soft, panicked whimpers. "It's okay, guys, it's just the wind," I tried to say, but my own voice was a dry, shaky whisper. We lay there, the four of us, in a perfect, suffocating silence broken only by the incessant, taunting voices. "Leo, don't be scared," a little voice said directly outside our tent's entrance flap. "You're our friend now." My mind was racing, trying to come up with a logical explanation. Maybe some campers had left their kids to wander? But what kind of parents would do that? And how would they know our names? It was all a cold, terrifying puzzle with no solution. We were just pieces in their game. Then came the final sound that pushed us over the edge. It wasn't a voice or a giggle. It was a soft, deliberate scrape, scrape against the side of the tent, right where my head was. It sounded like a long, thin fingernail or a small twig being dragged slowly, methodically, along the fabric. My entire body went rigid. I felt Sarah's hand grab my arm, her fingers digging in so hard it felt like she was trying to leave a mark. We both heard it, and we both knew, with a primal certainty that bypassed all logic, that whatever was making that sound was right there, just inches away from us. It was touching our tent. That was it. "We're leaving," I whispered, the words coming out as a forced breath. Sarah didn't argue. We fumbled in the dark, our hands shaking so hard we could barely zip up our sleeping bags. The voices seemed to multiply now, giggling and whispering all around us, like we were their main entertainment. "You're leaving already?" But we just started having fun. A chorus of tiny voices mocked, the words full of a chilling, mocking disappointment. Every rustle of a bag, every fumbled buckle, felt like an announcement to whatever was out there that we were getting ready to run. The scratching sound on the tent kept going, following my movements as I packed. It felt like it was teasing me, playing with me. We weren't packing up. We were fleeing till we finally got the tent and our gear crammed into our bags, a frantic, disorganized mess. I didn't care about packing neatly anymore. I just wanted to get out. I took the lead, holding my portable lantern out in front of me, its weak beams slicing through the oppressive darkness. Sarah was right behind me, holding the kids' hands, her grip so tight I knew she was terrified. The moon was a sickly sliver through the dense canopy, and our lanterns only seemed to make the shadows longer and more monstrous. We moved as fast as we could, tripping over roots that seemed to have sprouted out of nowhere, each stumble sending a jolt of panic through me. The voices didn't stay behind at the campsite. They came with us. "Where are you going?" A child's voice would call out from behind a tree to our left. "We'll show you the way." Another one would giggle from the right. It was like they were a pack of unseen, mischievous children running alongside us, just out of the glow of our lanterns. I was trying to follow the trail we had used earlier, but nothing looked right. The path was narrower, the trees felt closer, and the whole forest seemed to have shifted around us, like we had stepped into a different, more hostile version of the park. The silence of the forest was completely gone, replaced by the constant, Relentless whispers that seemed to be echoing from everywhere and nowhere all at once, and my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears, a frantic drumbeat of pure terror. We were moving for what felt like an eternity, and I kept shining my lantern ahead, searching for a familiar landmark, a big boulder, a cluster of ferns, anything. But everything looked the same, just an endless wall of looming, dark trees. I started to get that gut-wrenching, primal feeling that we weren't just disoriented. We were lost. The voices started to get more insistent, their playful tone shifting into a kind of demanding urgency. "Come on, follow us. This way," they'd call out, trying to lure us off the path, into the deeper, darker woods. I pulled Leo and Sophia closer to me, my mind screaming with a desperate need to just run, to not look back. Then, they all came together in a unified chorus, a dozen or more tiny voices singing my name. "Daniel, this way, Daniel," they sang, and it was followed by a chilling, high-pitched laugh that echoed through the trees. It was an absolute breaking point. We were in a maze, and they were the ones holding the map. All I could do was pray we'd hit the road before we went so deep into the woods that we'd never be able to find our way out again, that I was starting to lose hope, the crushing weight of despair settling over me. We had to have been walking for at least an hour, maybe more, and the path had become nothing but a vague impression in the leaf litter. The voices had shed their playful pretense entirely. "You can't leave us. You have to stay and play," one shrieked, no longer with a mischievous giggle, but with a raw, desperate fury. The giggling became a frantic, hysterical noise, and it wasn't just coming from the sides anymore. I could feel it right behind us, a sense of something gaining on us, moving faster than we were. I felt a sudden, icy breath on the back of my neck, and the hair on my arms stood on end. It was like something had just passed right through me. I instinctively flinched, pulling the kids even closer, my eyes darting back and forth in the darkness. Sarah let out a small gasp and pointed ahead with a trembling finger, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and disbelief. Through a final, thick patch of bushes, I saw it. The glint of a lamppost. We were at the edge of the forest, and just beyond it, the parking lot and our car. The moment she pointed, the voices erupted into a unified, high-pitched wail. It wasn't human laughter anymore. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated frustration, like a child's tantrum but magnified 1,000 times. The sound was so jarring and mournful, it made my skin crawl. We stumbled forward, crashing through the final bits of undergrowth, and the moment my shoes hit the asphalt of the parking lot, the sound stopped. Just like that. The silence was absolute and deafening. A sharp, final click, like a switch had been flipped. We scrambled to the car, our hands shaking so hard I could barely get the key in the lock. We threw the kids in the back and jumped in the front, and I peeled out of the parking lot without a second thought, my foot heavy on the gas pedal. As we drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see some tiny, shadowy figures on the road behind us, but there was nothing. We had been just a few hundred meters from the entrance the whole time, led in a terrifying, sadistic circle by something that wanted to keep us playing forever. We never spoke a word about what happened on the ride home. The terror was too real, too deep, and it lingered in the silence between us like a third passenger in the car. It wasn't a joke, a prank, or a hallucination. It was something that had wanted us to get lost, something that had been playing with our lives as if they were nothing more than a game. My brother Leo and I, we were inseparable. Grew up in this sleepy town in the Midwest, the kind of place where nothing ever happens, and if it does, everyone knows about it before the sun sets. We'd spend our summers just roaming the woods behind our house, building forts, pretending we were explorers charting new, unknown territories. Our parents, bless their hearts, were always encouraging this wild streak in us, which is probably why we decided to ditch our usual hangouts and go for something bigger. It was late spring, I remember, just after I'd finished my sophomore year of college. Life was pretty simple then. My biggest worry was my terrible GPA and what I was going to do with my summer besides working at the local diner. That was the year Leo bought a used Jeep Grand Cherokee, a beast of a thing with rusted fenders and a strange smell that no amount of air freshener could ever get rid of. We had this crazy idea to go deep into the Allegheny National Forest. We wanted to feel truly alone, to see if we could survive a few days without cell service or the constant hum of civilization. It was supposed to be a bonding trip, a classic two brothers against the wild kind of adventure, you know? The first day was exactly what we'd hoped for. We drove for hours until the paved road turned into a gravel path and then just vanished into the tree line. We set up camp near a small, gurgling creek. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth, and the only sounds were the birds and the water. We spent the afternoon setting up our tent, gathering firewood, and just messing around, laughing at old jokes. Leo was always the more practical one, so he took charge of the fire, meticulously stacking the logs like he was building a tiny, perfect fortress. I just sat there, soaking it all in, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long, long time. As the sun started to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, we sat by the fire, eating our canned chili, talking about everything and nothing. The night was cold but clear, and the stars were so bright they looked like they were hanging just out of reach. We eventually crawled into our tent, zipped ourselves into our sleeping bags, and drifted off to the sound of the crackling fire and the rhythmic flow of the creek. It was perfect, a perfect, naive, foolishly blissful moment before everything went wrong. Sometime in the dead of night, I woke up with a jolt. I wasn't sure what it was at first. The fire was just embers now, and the creek's gurgle seemed to have faded into the background. I listened, my heart pounding in my ears. And then I heard it, a faint, rhythmic thwack followed by a thump. It was a sound that had no business being out there. It was metallic, sharp, and deliberate. It sounded like an axe hitting wood. I nudged Leo awake, and he grumbled, "What?" His voice was thick with sleep. "Listen," I whispered, my voice barely audible. We both stayed quiet for what felt like an eternity, our breaths held. Then, the sound came again, clearer this time. Thwack, thump. It was closer. My blood ran cold. My mind, trying to make sense of the sound, pictured a lumberjack working in the middle of the night, a ludicrous thought, but it was the only thing I could come up with. The sound repeated, but this time, it was a little louder, a little closer. Thwack, thump. It was deliberate, almost like a metronome, but with a terrifying, irregular beat. Leo and I just stared at each other, our eyes wide with a shared, silent terror. We didn't dare say a word, didn't dare move. We were two lumps of flesh and bone, frozen in a thin nylon tent, and a sound that shouldn't exist was getting closer with every passing second. Thwack, thump. The pauses between each strike were just long enough for us to catch a ragged breath, for our minds to race, for our imaginations to conjure up the worst possible scenarios. The sound wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to be coming from all around us. One thwack would be to our left, and the next to our right. The air was thick with something I can only describe as a tangible wrongness. We were surrounded. Thwack, thump. This time it was right outside the tent, close enough that I swore I could feel the vibrations of the impact through the ground. The smell of fresh-cut wood, something so rustic and normal, filled the air, and my stomach twisted into a knot. It was a smell that should have brought comfort, but here, in the suffocating darkness, it was a promise of something sinister. We lay there, two statues of fear, for what felt like an eternity. The thwack and thump continued, a gruesome beatboxing session from an unseen audience. It was no longer coming from all around us. It was now a single, steady sound, just a few feet from our tent. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that followed was a physical presence, heavy and suffocating. It was worse than the sound. My mind was screaming for an explanation, any explanation, but all I could hear was the frantic drumming of my own heart. Staying inside the tent felt like waiting for a curtain call, like we were the grand finale of some twisted performance. "We have to get out," I whispered, the words scratching my dry throat. Leo, who had a death grip on my arm, just nodded, his eyes wide and unblinking. We unzipped the tent flap slowly, the sound of the zipper ripping through the silence like a gunshot. My hand was shaking so badly that the beam from my flashlight danced erratically across the ground. We emerged into the cold night air, the overwhelming smell of freshly chopped pine hitting us like a punch. My flashlight swept across the familiar landscape of our camp, the dying embers of the fire, the creek bed, the dense wall of trees. Nothing. There was no one there. No hulking figure with a bloody axe, no flickering lantern, no footprints in the soft earth. Just us, the forest, and an impossible sound that had just vanished. But then my light landed on a tree trunk about 10 feet from our tent. And then another, and another. My stomach dropped. Each tree had a deep, fresh gash in it. Not a single, random cut, but a series of precise, deliberate chops, forming a perfect circle around our entire campsite. The wood shavings were still light-colored and crisp, scattered on the damp ground. Someone had just been here, in the pitch black, meticulously and silently drawing a perimeter of severed bark around us while we lay shivering in our tent. It was a message, a boundary line drawn in wood and fear, and the sheer audacity of it, the cold, calculated madness, was more terrifying than any monstrous sound. The realization hit us like a tidal wave. We weren't just a couple of guys who heard a weird noise. We were being toyed with. The terror turned from a primal, gut-wrenching dread into a cold, focused urgency. We had to get out of there. We didn't exchange a single word. Our actions were purely instinctive. We ripped the tent pegs out of the ground, threw the sleeping bags and cooking gear into a chaotic pile, and shoved everything back into the Jeep's trunk with a frantic, desperate energy. Every rustle of a leaf, every snapping twig in the distance, made us flinch, our eyes darting to the tree line as if expecting some ghastly figure to step out and greet us. Even the rising sun, which should have brought a sense of safety, only served to illuminate the gruesome scene more clearly, highlighting the fresh, splintered wood and the fine sawdust scattered like a perverse kind of glitter around our now-abandoned campsite. As we scrambled into the Jeep and Leo turned the key in the ignition, I remember the engine sputtering to life and the sheer, unadulterated relief that washed over me. It was a brief moment of hope, a flicker of light in the suffocating darkness. We sped down the narrow dirt path, the tires kicking up a cloud of dust behind us, our eyes glued to the rearview mirror. We were putting distance between ourselves and that nightmare. But just as the trees started to thin out and I began to feel the tension in my shoulders loosen, I heard it again. A faint, distant thwack, thump. It was muffled by the wind and the sound of the engine, but it was unmistakably there. It was far away, as if whatever was out there was keeping a slow, steady pace, following us. The sound was no longer a terrifying presence, but a psychological torment, a slow, rhythmic reminder that we were not getting away. It was a promise, a chilling echo in the silent forest, and my heart sank with the horrifying certainty that we weren't running from anything. We were being herded. That faint, rhythmic sound was the soundtrack to our terror-filled drive out of the forest. I kept my eyes glued to the side mirrors, half expecting to see a figure emerge from the dense foliage, a silent pursuer with an axe in hand. But there was nothing, just the endless rows of towering trees. The sound, however, was stubbornly present, a ghost in the machine, a low thrum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around us. It was distant, yes, but it was relentless, a metronome counting down to a conclusion we couldn't even begin to imagine. We didn't talk. What was there to say? Are you hearing that too? The question was redundant. The fear was a shared, palpable entity inside that car, and every mile marker we passed felt less like progress and more like a cruel joke. The thing was toying with us, letting us run, making us think we were getting away, all while maintaining its horrifying beat. It wasn't a chase. It was a slow, deliberate walk to a destination we didn't want to reach. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin out, revealing the familiar outline of the dirt lot where we had parked. Relief, hot and stinging, flooded through me, but it was tainted with a creeping sense of dread. We were almost there, almost safe. As we pulled into the small clearing, my eyes went straight to the Jeep. Something was wrong. The back hatch, which we had meticulously closed and locked, was wide open. The trunk was empty, our gear now scattered around it like discarded bones. My breath hitched in my throat. We braked to a sudden, screeching halt. Then I saw it. Planted with chilling precision in the soft earth right beside the open hatch was an axe. It was old, the handle worn smooth and the head glinting with a rust that looked almost like dried blood in the morning light. The handle was carved with something I couldn't make out from a distance, a kind of intricate, coiling pattern that felt like an ugly secret waiting to be told. The thing that had been making that sound was not behind us. It had been here, waiting, all along. And the sound was a game, a taunt to keep us occupied while it got to our car. The terror was no longer a game. It was a cold, hard fact. We stumbled out of the Jeep, our bodies moving on pure adrenaline. My eyes never left that axe. It felt like the culmination of everything that had happened, the physical embodiment of the silent menace that had been toying with us all night. Leo grabbed the handle, his face a mask of shock and disgust, and pulled it from the ground. I remember the sound of the earth releasing it, a sort of wet, sucking sound that made my skin crawl. We didn't talk, didn't question. We just threw it into the trunk, slammed the hatch shut with a violent finality, and got back into the car. The engine roared to life, and we sped out of that clearing, leaving the forest and its chilling secrets behind. As we drove away, the silence was the most terrifying thing of all. The thwack, thump was gone. It was a silence of completion, as if the game had ended and the score had been settled. The absence of the sound was a chilling confirmation that the purpose had been served, that we drove for hours without stopping, not talking, just letting the road stretch out before us, putting as much distance as we could between ourselves and that place. The sun was fully up now, but it did nothing to shake the cold dread that was lodged deep in our bones. We never went back, of course. We couldn't. I still have the axe. It's been in the back of a closet for years, a rusty, silent monument to the most terrifying night of our lives. The carvings on the handle are clearer now, not just a pattern, but what looks like two coiled serpents, their heads meeting at a single, unnerving point. We still talk about it sometimes, but we never have an answer. We have no idea what it was, why it did what it did, or what its final intentions were. Was it a warning? A ritual? A macabre game of catch and release? I don't know. All I know is that we're safe, but the memory of that night, the cold fear, the silence, and the knowledge that something out there understood us well enough to know our every move. That part of the nightmare, it never left.